Hi, my name's Clifton Van IV, and I'm the president of Livingston and Haven. Each year, Livingston and Haven has an annual sales meeting, and this year we were honored by the presence of Herb Meyer. Herb Meyer was part of the CIA during Ronald Reagan's regime and really was the radar for Ronald Reagan. He looked at megatrends and what the future of different demographics and situations might be around the world. Herb spent about an hour and a half with our group sharing some very insightful statistics and sort of long-term, long-range thinking. We'd like to share that with you today. We hope you enjoy it. Check out Herb Meyer.
And thank you for inviting me. I appreciate that. It's nice to be with you. At an event I was speaking at about a year ago, somebody came up to me and said, "Had you ever been to the Spy Museum in Washington?" The answer is no. When I worked for President Reagan at the CIA, we didn't have a spy museum. We had spies. It was a different world. We actually did things. We used to prepare the daily briefing for the president. We were going to send him a note one day saying, "Nothing happened. Go ride your horse, chop wood." We chickened out at the last minute, but too bad. He would have enjoyed that. Anyway, thanks for inviting me. We've all had the experience of being on an airplane when it hits turbulence, and it's frightening. The plane lurches, loses altitude, one of the overhead bins pops open, and you're just sitting there bouncing along, tightening your seatbelt, wondering if, gee, I wonder if I should break the rules, power up my cell phone, make one last phone call. And then the pilot comes on the intercom. He says, "Sorry about this. We'll be out of it in 6 or 7 minutes. It's clear up ahead." Well, how does he know that? The answer, of course, is that he's got radar in the cockpit. Radar is the instrument that tells him what's out in front of him, not what he can see looking out the windshield, what's still invisible but further up ahead. What a lot of people don't realize, even in Washington, is that the CIA was built to be the president's radar, the instrument that would tell him what the future is going to be, and to tell him that future soon enough and clearly enough so he could prepare for the future, and if he didn't like the future, he could change the future before it happened. That's the whole point. Did we use spies and covert action? Yeah, we sure did. And the best use of spies and covert action is to get that information soon enough to prepare the president. In the last decade or so, the CIA has just walked away from that radar function. They don't do it anymore. And it's been a disaster. We had 9/11 itself, that mess over weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, whatever happened or didn't happen in Benghazi on September 11th. General Petraeus was an extraordinarily gifted military leader. He won the war in Iraq. He really won it. But he was the wrong man at the CIA. And then he had his personal problems. His personal life became a mess, and that screwed up everything. First rule of Washington: never sleep with your biographer. Never ends well. I've told my official biographer under no circumstances will I sleep with him. Paul, his wife Susan, and their 8 children said they were greatly relieved to hear that. I was lucky enough to be part of President Reagan's radar. And this morning I want to do for you what we did for President Reagan. I want to paint a picture of the world that lies in front of you. Not what you can see watching television, reading the newspapers, or surfing the web. What's further out ahead may not be visible. And there are some business opportunities emerging you may not be aware of yet, and I want to show you what those are. One point before we begin: I've been dealing with this sort of thing for a long time. In the last few years, a trend has developed in our country that's unhealthy. We argue before we understand. That is not a smart thing to do, and it sets a terrible example for young people. When there are complicated and contentious issues, honorable people will disagree about what to do. That's fine. It's how we figure out our way forward. Intelligent people should be able to reach a common understanding of what the problem is before we start yelling and screaming about what to do. And we don't do that. Look at the political campaigns. Watch any of the talk shows. Even when I'm on one of the panels on MSNBC or CNN or Fox, it's a shouting match. Everyone's screaming past everybody else. No one's listening. The one thing you never hear from a talking head on television is, gee, that's an interesting point you just made. I haven't thought about that. I'll change my mind. No one ever changes their mind anymore. Let's not do that. I've left my politics at home. If you want to know what I think we should do, buy me a beer some evening. I will be happy to tell you in great detail how to solve all the world's problems. Let's leave the partisan politics out of this. If we can reach an understanding of what's happening in the world, what it means, what the business opportunities are going to be, we'll have accomplished a lot. So let's light up the radar screen and see what's out there. When you look at the world, the first thing you see is that the world is becoming modern. And this is what the war is really all about. The best way to explain modernity is actually to go back into history. Sometimes you have to see where you were, where you are now, to see where you're going. So just for a moment, let's press the rewind button. We'll go back to Europe at the end of the 17th century, 1690, 1695, sometime around there. Life was terrible. Lifespan was very short, mid-40s in most places. Most people were half-starved most of the time. When they prayed that when the next famine came, at least some of their children might survive. That's what you prayed for. That's how bad it was. People were illiterate, uneducated. Women weren't allowed to be educated. Travel was uncommon. Most people spent their entire lives within 20 miles of where they'd been born. You had no say in how you were governed. You're a peasant, you're a serf, you just shut up and did what you were told. And nothing changed. Tomorrow was the same as yesterday. The way you plowed the field, that's how your grandfather did it, that's how your grandson would do it. If you were the woman of the house, the way you washed clothes, prepared meals, that's how your grandmother did it, that's how your granddaughter would do it. Life was static. The modern world is very different. Lifespan's nearly 80. Incomes vary widely, bother some people. There's no starvation. For the first time in history, we have a society, the modern world, there's no starvation. That's never happened before. Do you realize what an extraordinary human accomplishment that is? And it's happened within our lifetimes. It's so extraordinary that today we are told accurately the biggest health problem faced by poor people is obesity. Isn't that stunning? It's actually happened. People are educated, literate, women are educated, they own businesses, they run for political office, travel is very common. We have a huge say in how we're governed. We don't always like the outcome of elections, but we have a big say in it. And nothing stays the same. The technical word for the kind of change we live with is industrial productivity. From the moment someone comes along and says, you know, there's a better way to do that, everything changes. Somebody starts a business, they develop new products, new services. There's a whole industry doing it. Someone has a second idea, now there's a second industry, a third industry, and a fourth. 5, 10, 30 years later, someone comes along with an even better idea, completely changes that first industry. Then it happens to the second industry, and the third, and on and on. It's like an escalator that never actually stops. Like with any piece of machinery, from time to time it breaks down. And if that escalator breaks down and you don't have a good firm grip, well, you can get hurt. And then it picks up again and it goes. That's us. That's the modern world. That's how we live. Our transition to the modern world wasn't smooth and seamless. The 18th and 19th centuries were violent. In our own country, we had a civil war. We killed 700,000 of each other. The 20th century was ghastly. World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Bosnia, fascism, communism. Look what it took to get us here. When you look at the war, when you look at all the turmoil in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Egypt, Syria, all the rest, what you're looking at is the entire Islamic world beginning to make the journey we began more than 300 years ago. And what we keep saying to these people is, can't you guys do this by next Thursday? No, they can't. Look what it took us. There's a very specific reason it's going to take them a while. And that's the nature of Islam itself. When you study history, it's the story of competing operating systems. Our operating system is Western civilization. This is who we are. Western civilization started in the ancient world, took off in Europe in the 15th, 16th, 17th centuries, when Judaism and Christianity reconciled with the modern world. The rabbis, the priests, the scholars, they figured it out, they paved the way forward. That triggered the scientific revolution itself. It ignited the greatest explosion of art, literature, and music the world's ever known. Shakespeare, Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, Bach. When you stand back from it, here's what Western civilization is. The individual is at the center of it. Church and state are separate. It's the rule of law, the idea of property rights, economic liberty, individual rights, human rights, women's rights. In Western civilization, we unleash the entrepreneurial talents of our people. We encourage intellectual curiosity. It's an endless struggle for equality among the races and the sexes. Islam is a different operating system. In Islam, church and state are combined. They don't have that separation the way we do. Islam is a political structure as well as a faith. It's both, and the individual is subservient to that church-state combination. You do not have the option to opt out. Islam does not unleash the entrepreneurial talents of its people, and it discourages intellectual curiosity. That's why there hasn't been a scientific breakthrough from the Islamic world in 1,000 years. And this is one of the tragedies of history. The Muslims are geniuses. They invented algebra. It's an Arabic word, algebra. They virtually invented the science of medicine. In every field of science and technology, they led the entire world, and then everything stopped. There's no other example in history of that happening. But if you spend 1,000 years crushing intellectual curiosity and slaughtering your geniuses, you don't get new technology, you don't get new science. The great tragedy is we have no way of knowing what the human race might have known by now if they hadn't have done that. There's one other feature of that operating system that's relevant. All too often, it treats women as though they were property rather than people. Very simply put, that operating system is incompatible with the modern world, and that's the glitch. What we're looking at now, when we look at all the turmoil in the Mideast and around that part of the world, is 1.5 billion people beginning to write the code for version 2.0. Beginning to figure out how to reconcile the principles of their faith, which are marvelous, with the modern world as we did centuries ago. That's what this is all about. We're living through one of the great moments in world history. The entire Islamic world is on its way to becoming modern. And remember, they only just started. In one of the oddities of history, we know the precise moment the Islamic world stepped on the road to modernity, and it was 9/11. There's an old rule in geopolitics. It's okay to hit the Americans. It's sort of fun. Never hit the Americans so hard they feel it. Then they kill you. Japan discovered that in 1941. When they hit us at Pearl Harbor, every intelligent fascist in the world said, "What'd you do that for? The war was going great. Now the Americans are going to get into it." And we did, and with our allies, we destroyed fascism. Well, fast forward to 9/11. When the trade towers came down, when the Pentagon was hit, every intelligent radical Islamo-fascist in the world said, "What'd you do that for? Now the Americans are going to send their armies out." We did. It's been 11, 12 years. We can spend all day, all night arguing about what we've done, how we did it, should we have gone into Iraq, should we have done it differently. I'm one of the 310 million Americans Bush didn't ask either. Wish he had. Not defending anything. Here's where we are after all these years. In Afghanistan, the Taliban's gone, bin Laden's dead. In Iraq, Saddam Hussein's gone. Iraq is actually a functioning democracy. It's very fragile. It's the first functioning democracy ever in the Arab world. Do realize our troops won the war. It's an extraordinary victory, and they're just not getting the credit. They won the war. Okay? In Tunisia, Ali is gone. In Libya, Gaddafi's gone. In Egypt, Mubarak's gone. Syria, Assad's on the ropes. Do you see the pattern? This isn't what bin Laden wanted. When he hit us on 9/11, he was trying to lock down the Islamic world into the 7th century. Blew it apart. He made the classic mistake. He hit the Americans too hard. Is it going smoothly? No. We making mistakes? Of course. Wars are a mess. They always look like you're losing. And by the way, when you study the history of wars like our Civil War, World War II, the heaviest casualties are in the 6 months before the other guy surrenders. It always gets worse before it gets better. And so don't be discouraged. These things take a long time. And that's just the way wars are. And I'll give you a way to look at this. Remember Occupy Wall Street? A couple of years ago, all of our cities, probably here too, had big demonstrations, went on for a while. Some of them got pretty nasty. If you were watching that on television, say in Tehran, you would have said the United States is on the verge of revolution. No, it wasn't. What you don't see on television are tens of millions of us getting up in the morning, dropping the kids off at school, heading for the office, and saying, gee, I wish these idiots would get out of the way. But American goes to work isn't a Fox News alert. It's like airplane lands on time. They don't break into the news to tell you that. It's only when something goes wrong. What you don't see on the news, understandably, are tens of millions of people in the Islamic world getting up in the morning, getting the kids off to school, and saying things like, gee, I'd rather have a Starbucks on the corner than a car bomb. Wouldn't it be great if IKEA or Walmart came into the neighborhood instead of another crazy lunatic mosque? Now, you don't see that kind of thing on TV, but that's what's happening. Don't be discouraged. We're living through one of the greatest moments in world history. The world is becoming modern. And that's what's happening. And as the world becomes modern, now we can see the second very big thing happening. Not only is the world becoming modern, the world's becoming rich, fast. Never in history have so many human beings emerged so swiftly from poverty. Here are the numbers. By 1980 or 1990, about 2 billion human beings had crossed the line out of poverty. Since then, about another 500 million have emerged from poverty. A lot of them in China and India. In the last 6 years, about 20 million Brazilians have crossed the line out of poverty. Today, on the continent of Africa, the number of people with disposable income is over 300 million. When you put all the numbers together, here's what you've got. Each year, between 50 million and 100 million human beings are crossing the line out of poverty. The low estimate is 50 million a year. The high estimate is 100 million a year, somewhere in there. With numbers that big, you can't be too precise. I think it's been closer to the higher end. But let's be conservative. With the global recession, let's drop it. So every year, 50, 60, 65, 70, 72 million human beings are crossing the line out of poverty. Now, when we say someone's out of poverty, we don't mean they have a big house with a swimming pool in the backyard and 2 SUVs in the driveway. To be out of poverty means there's enough food to eat. You're living decently, not in a house as nice as yours or mine, but you're living decently. The children have been inoculated against the basic childhood illnesses, as yours have been, as mine were. They're getting up in the morning, they're off to school, having breakfast. At least one of the parents has some kind of work that's putting some disposable money in their pocket. Not as much as you've got in your pocket or I've got in my pocket, but some work that's putting money in their pocket. That's what it means to be out of poverty. And today, more people are reaching that point than ever before in history. If this trend continues, and in fact it's accelerating, if it just continues, it means that within your lifetimes, within the lifetimes of more than half of you sitting here this morning, the world will cross a line that's never been crossed before and that most economists never dreamed could be approached. For the first time in history, the overwhelming majority of human beings will not be poor. Isn't that stunning? That do you realize most of us here today will live to see this? If we don't, our children will. And by the way, our kids are not being told this is in front of them. We're telling them the world's getting worse and worse, and it isn't. It's getting better and better. Our children's kids in high school, I passed on the way out here, they will live in a world in which for the first time in history, the overwhelming majority of people are not poor. Why is it happening? We figured it out. Some things you need a genius to figure out. Jonas Salk and the polio vaccine. One day another genius will develop a pill that prevents dementia or cures cancer. Other things, you don't need a genius. Good example is physical fitness. Do you want to be physically fit? Eat sensibly, get a lot of exercise. You're a genius to know that. And there's no one way to do it. I'm a cyclist. I go out for a hard bike ride every day. But you can ride a bike, jog, swim, work out in a gym, a million ways to be fit. There's no one way to eat sensibly, but we know what we mean by that. You can give someone some help, but actually not a lot. You know, if you said you wanted to be fit and you couldn't afford running shoes, well, put it on my credit card. Happy to help you out, and if you can pay me back one day, great. Not, it's my good deed for the decade. And if you said you wanted to eat sensibly but didn't know what to do, call my wife. Jill's a phenomenal cook. She knows all kinds of recipes, delicious, healthy. She'd be happy to pass them on. And that's all the help I can give these people. I can't go to your house 5 days a week and put on those running shoes and run. And I don't want to move in with you and your family to make sure you're not wolfing down pizza and cheeseburgers every night. But if they've got the interest and the will and the discipline, they'll be fit. Everybody knows it. Well, when everybody knows something, more people do it. That's why you see people jogging all hours of the day and night, joining health clubs. At least we talk about eating sensibly. On a much larger scale, if you want to bring your population out of poverty, it's the free market. Property rights, the rule of law, stable financial system, reasonable regulation and taxation. Put that in place, kaboom! Your population comes out of poverty. Everybody knows that. Sorry. Everyone who didn't go to Harvard Law School knows that. Okay? It's not that complicated. Every peasant in every field in the world understands what I just said. They can't put those words on it. What they know is that their government will protect them rather than threaten them, give them a framework, property rights, rule of law, stable financial system, on and on. Do things a government's supposed to do. Protect them from foreign invasion, build roads, run the schools, deliver the mail, pick up the garbage, and on, and then just get out of the way. People come along, they start businesses, they develop new products and services, standards of living go up. Everybody knows it, okay? Well, all over the world, more governments are putting in place these free market mechanisms. That's what's happening. And the result is one of the most stunning developments ever. The emergence of a global middle class. This is the biggest underreported news story in the world. And you see it all the time. You go off to some country you've never been to before on a family vacation or a business trip. You get to the hotel, and you go up to your room, and you just push back the curtains to look out, and there's traffic on the street. And you look to the left, there's a shopping complex. You look the other way, there's a movie theater, and you go, when did all that happen? The answer is, last 30 years. Why did it happen? We figured it out. And as I say, you just keep seeing this all the time. I was in a hotel one night, I'm always in hotels, and the wireless system went down. I couldn't get my email. Well, you know, you can't get your email, you panic. You always think the next email could be the one. You know, it's going to change everything. Never is it? You finally get your email working, and it's an ad from a company trying to sell me an ointment to enlarge a part of my body I had not previously been told was too small. But for this, you're yelling at the front desk at the hotel. Or something. Anyway, they put me through the technical line. I was talking to some kid, sounded like a college kid in California working a part-time job. And he figured out that the router on the floor of my hotel had gone down, so he was rebooting the router. We had a couple of minutes to kill while this was happening. We were chatting. He said this was his last call. He was finishing his work shift. He was going to get together with some friends, have dinner, maybe go catch a movie. And at one point in the conversation, I said, by the way, where are you? He said, oh, I'm in Guatemala City. I said, what are you doing in Guatemala City? He said, I'm Guatemalan. Had no accent that I could pick up. And a half hour before I talked to him, I was talking to my son in Boston. And Tom said he was finishing his work shift, get together with some friends, maybe catch a movie, same thing. You know, when you pick up the phone to order something from LLB or my company or yours, you know how often the call bounces to India or the Philippines? Do you realize how often they're bouncing your call somewhere else? There's a company in Nairobi called Kenya Call Center. If you're sitting in a call center in Nairobi, you're in an office building, got a computer on the table, set of headphones on. When you finish your work shift, you jump in the car, pick up your kid at the daycare center, swing over to the supermarket for something for supper. There's a chain of supermarkets in Africa called Massmart. Walmart just bought them. There's another chain called Nakumat. Put up big box grocery stores like Costco across the continent. Then we go home, flip on the 42-inch flat screen TV, catch up on the local news while you get supper on the table. After supper, walk the dog, water the lawn, take a walk, run the kids over to some high school soccer match, or go to church choir practice or a PTA meeting, or just settle down, watch a movie on television. All over the world, people are leading lives like that. And it's the emergence of a global middle class that is the biggest underreported news story in the world. It's good for several reasons. First, it's a lot of children not hungry. This is just good. The second reason is political. People like us don't go to war with people like us. We just don't. We send nasty emails. Things really get bad, you call the lawyers. Don't go in shooting. People would rather shop than fight. And I'll give you an example of this. Look at Western Europe today. Boy, are they in trouble economically. Western Europe is a complete mess. My wife and I spent some time in Italy over December. In Italy, the official statistic is that 50% of young people, young meaning up to the age of 35, 50% of Italians up to the age of 35 have never worked. They've never held a job. And the real figure is higher than that. That's not just an economic catastrophe, it's a human catastrophe. IKEA opened a store in the city of Pisa, Italy. It took them 8 years to get approval. This being IKEA, can we assume they did the paperwork correctly? Okay. It took them 8 years. They advertised for 200 jobs. They got 29,000 applications. When they opened a store in Sicily, they got 43,700 applications. Spain's in worse shape than Italy. Greece is in worse shape than Spain. There isn't going to be a war in Western Europe. It's just not going to happen. Germany isn't arming secretly behind the Rhine. Spain isn't going to invade Portugal. Italy isn't going to invade Ethiopia. This is the first time in the history of Europe they've been in economic trouble. There just isn't going to be a war because people like us don't do that. The finance ministers are meeting, I think, next Tuesday. They'll come up with another crazy Euro loan package. The Italian Parliament's actually meeting an emergency session. They're debating whether to extend the work week from 18 hours to 25. Big fight in Italy. It's not going to be a war. That's a good thing. Look, I'm the biggest hawk you'll ever meet. I have actually fondled nuclear bombs. All right? Do you know we've got 9,000 nuclear warheads in our arsenal? Even I can't figure out who to drop 9,000 nukes on. The kind of wars we've seen in the past, big infantry movements and Navy fleets sailing the oceans and bombers overhead, that's less likely in the future than in the past as the world becomes middle class. Never disarm. There's always some creep out there, whether it's a bin Laden or a Vladimir Putin. But the kind of wars we've seen in the past are less likely as we become middle class. The second reason this is good, well, the first reason is just people not starving. The second reason is it's going to be a less violent world. The third reason is the one most directly related to you. As the world becomes modern, as it emerges from poverty, as we create a global middle class, it means the total customer base for every product and service you can provide is now growing at a rate of 50 to 100 million new customers every year. Wow. Now, these customers may not be where you would like them to be. You may have to alter the products and services you're selling to reach them, and we'll get into that in a couple of minutes. But anytime somebody tells you that your total customer base is growing at a rate of 50 to 100 million new customers every year, that's extraordinary. And boy, do we need these customers. And that's because of the third and last of the very big things happening in the world. This one's happening in our own part of the world. It's not a good trend, and no one saw this coming. The first big thing in the world is becoming modern. Second big thing is becoming rich, emerging from poverty. Third big thing happening in the world is we're getting old. And here are the numbers. If you want to sustain a country's population, the birth rate has to be 2.1. 2.1 births per woman. You need 2 births just to replace the mother and father. You need 0.1. Some children don't grow up and have their own children. So the key number is 2.1. Today in Western Europe, the birth rate is 1.5, 30% below replacement. What that means in real numbers is that 30 years from now, there will be between 70 and 80 million fewer Europeans alive than are alive today. That's the biggest, fastest population drop in recorded history. The birth rate in Germany right now is 1.3. Ask a German teenager, how many cousins have you got? The kid says, what's a cousin? If you have one child, and the child grows up and marries someone who's also an only child, and then they have one child, which is what's happening, there's no aunt, there's no uncle, there's no cousin. In Germany, 30% of all women are childless. Among college-educated German women, 40% are childless. That's shut down. It means the number of deaths among Germans vastly exceeds the number of births. In other words, the population of living Germans is plunging. By the way, if here in North Carolina, 40% of college-educated women were childless, you'd be living in a different place. It's just not the same thing. The two countries in Europe with the lowest birth rate, Western Europe, the lowest birth rate are Italy and Spain. 1.2 dropping to 1.1. With the 1.2 birth rate in 20 years, you lose 30% of your entire working age population. Go ahead, take 30% of the working age population out of North Carolina. Where's the economy? Who's in the schools? Who's in the malls? Who's buying the products and services you're selling? You're dead. And this is what's happening now in Europe. Turns out, also to everyone's complete surprise, there's a powerful correlation between faith and children. People of faith tend to lead traditional lives. Grow up, settle down, get married, have a family. Europe has lost its faith. Europe describes itself as a secular post-Judeo-Christian civilization. Their phrase for it in their new constitution. It's an elegant way of saying the churches are empty except for a few old ladies and American tourists. It's true. If your whole population thinks, look, it's a cosmic joke, okay? There's nothing there. We're a collection of molecules. They're held together by gravity. At some point we activate. At some point we'll deactivate. If that's what you think, you're not going to fight for anything. What are you going to fight for? It's a joke. You're here for the ride. Make yourself comfortable. It's a lot more pleasant to sit at a cafe or go skiing than it is to stay up all night with a sick kid. So they stopped having babies. They also stopped getting married. Today in Europe, only 1 out of 7 couples gets married. Marriage is pretty much over. Last year in England, the total number of marriages was lower than the total number of marriages in England in 1895. So they don't like having babies, they don't like getting married. Turns out they don't like working either. The average European gets an additional 450 hours per year vacation versus an American. That's 10 and a half weeks. Give everybody in the United States an additional 10 and a half weeks paid vacation, you got a real problem. The gap with Scandinavia is bigger, it's about 17 weeks. Statistically, 1 out of 5 working age Swedes is on permanent disability insurance, which is odd. They look healthy to me. There's a young woman in Stockholm. She looks like she could be on the Swedish Olympic gymnastics team. She claimed to be allergic to electricity. Now, don't laugh. You're being culturally insensitive, which in Charlotte may be a crime at this point. Claimed to be allergic to electricity and therefore cannot be employed anywhere electric power is used. So she applied for permanent disability insurance and she got it. It's crazy. In the modern world, there's a deal, and it's this. The modern state is a welfare state. And I mean that in the non-political sense of the word. The modern state has an obligation to its citizens, to the young, to the poor, to the disadvantaged, to the sick, to the elderly. We can argue over how to do that. Democrats against Republicans, liberals and conservatives. In England, England, Labour versus conservative. In France, Gaullist versus socialist. But everyone accepts the obvious point. The modern state must serve its people. Of course it must. Boy, is that expensive. But where does the state get money from? And the answer, of course, is from taxpayers. And the next complicated question is, well, where do you get taxpayers from? The answer is from children. They grow up, they become taxpayers. That's how the world works. We used to understand this. When we were agricultural societies, everyone knew you need a lot of kids, you got to work the farms. Then we became industrial societies, post-industrial societies. All the geniuses, all the deep thinkers said, I don't need a lot of kids anymore, you got a machine. Oops, no one did the math. Here's what actually happens. was talking to a young woman about this in California. She has one sister. So her parents produced two children to take care of two parents. Take care of, meaning work and generate the tax revenue. Medicare, Social Security, every program for senior people, the buses that run them around, and movie matinees and shopping malls and things. And take care of them literally, stay in touch, get together on holidays, things you do with parents. This young woman has a partner, not a husband, a partner. They don't plan to have children. Her sister is married, has one child, and they don't plan to have any more. So these four people produced one child. Do you realize the tax burden on that one child to support those four? That's crushing. Whatever health care plans we wind up with, the cost won't drop. Those four are going to live longer. That doesn't even include the human element of get together with your parents on holidays, go over, mow the lawn, things you do with parents. When you go from 2 or 3 or 4 kids to take care of 2 parents to 1 to take care of 4, you just killed your economy. And that's what the Europeans did. What you're looking at isn't just a problem with the euro or a recession, it's a demographic death spiral. And the same thing is happening in Japan. The birth rate in Japan is 1.3, same as Germany. That means 30 years from now, there will be between 50 and 60 million fewer Japanese alive than are alive today. Now, at least the Europeans import people. They bring in immigrants. If you know Japan, they're not bringing in 50, 60 million Koreans to help run it. 50, 60 million Turks. They're shutting it down. They've already closed 2,000 schools, K through 12 in Japan. They now close schools at a rate of 400 school closings every year. They plan to keep closing 400 schools a year as far ahead as they can see. They've shut down 2 universities. They're closing a 3rd. Now they've started combining prefectures, which is their states. It's like combining North Carolina and South Carolina because you can't make it on your own anymore. That's shut down. What actually happens is this. When your birth rate drops below that 2.1 replacement level, your entire population is aging because you don't have enough young people replacing older people. Japan is aging so fast, by 2020, just 6 years from now, 1 out of every 5 Japanese citizens will be over the age of 70. No one can figure out how to run a modern society with 1 out of 5 people over 70. You can't do it. With all the trouble they've had, the earthquake, the tsunami, that nuclear meltdown at Fukushima, you probably saw stories in the newspapers that there was no looting in Japan. Well, yeah, old people don't loot. Last year, Unicharm, which is the largest manufacturer of diapers in Japan, announced that for the first time ever, they are now selling more adult diapers than baby diapers. Isn't that stunning? I mean, sayonara. Japan's committing national suicide. Okay? Here's what's happening in the United States. For 30 years, the U.S. birth rate was stuck at 2, just below the 2.1 replacement level. So we were going in the same direction as everyone else, not at the same rate. 3 years ago, for the first time in 30 years, the U.S. birth rate hit the 2.1 replacement level. And everyone got excited, this looked good. As demographers looked closely at the numbers, what they found was this. 3 years ago, the Anglo birth rate in the U.S. was 1.8, below the replacement level. 3 years ago, the Hispanic birth rate in the U.S. was 3.2. That's why we hit the 2.1. With the recession, with a lot of Hispanics returning to their native countries, once again, the U.S. birth rate has dropped below the 2.1 replacement level. It's at 1.9. That's where we are now. Remember I said there's a correlation between faith and children? Anybody want to guess which of our 50 states has the lowest birth rate and which has the highest? Any takers? Lowest is Vermont. Secular liberal Vermont. If the present trend continues, the last 2 surviving Vermonters will be Ben and Jerry. And the highest is Utah. By the way, every statistic I'm giving you is an official statistic. They're all from the United Nations, World Health Organization, government numbers. These are not my numbers. You'll never have another speaker come in with a different set of population numbers. Now, you can argue over what they mean, whether they're good or bad, but we're all using the same numbers from the same sources, and they're rock solid. What makes that so odd is if we got up from here jumped in our cars and started going to high schools and universities all over North Carolina, South Carolina, where I live, everywhere else, how many instructors do you think we'll find teaching that all through the West birth rates are imploding? Not many. What they teach here and where I live in Europe, Japan, that the worst thing that ever happened to planet Earth is humanity. We pollute, we use resources. Teach that to kids for 15 years. A lot of them grow up. They think bringing a baby into the world is committing a hostile act against the planet. Then we act surprised when birth rates drop. Here are the overall numbers. In the West, birth rates are mostly at or below the 2.1 replacement level. Canada is 1.5, right in the middle of the European average. Mexico's birth rate is plunging. It was way over 3, and now it's about 2.6, 2.7, which is very healthy. Despite the problems they have with drugs and crime, Mexico's developing a huge middle class very quickly. As they do, the birth rate's coming down to a good level. In Latin America, there are some birth rates just skimming above the replacement level, which is very good. Chile, Colombia, Brazil, for example. But mostly in the West, birth rates are plunging below the replacement level. There's one exception. There's only one country in the modern world whose birth rate is substantially above the replacement level. It's Israel. Birth rate's 3. 30 years from now, there will be more young people in Israel than in Germany. That's a polite way of saying 30 years from now, Israel will be able to put a bigger army onto the battlefield than the Wehrmacht. I mean, isn't that stunning? You imagine going to Hitler in 1944, saying, Adolf, don't blow your brains out. It gets really interesting. Now, first, one of your Wehrmacht soldiers is going to become Pope, and that's Benedict. And there's going to be a country you never heard of called Israel with an army bigger than the Wehrmacht. It's actually happened. In the Islamic world, the birth rates are above the 2.1 replacement level. They go from 2.4 to 6.8. Even these are starting to come down, and in just the last few months, last year or so, there's been new information that has caught all the demographers by surprise. In some of the Muslim countries, birth rates are plunging. And the two countries where they're plunging the fastest are Turkey and Iran. The birth rate in Iran has dropped so far so fast that today the birth rate in the capital city of Tehran is actually lower than the birth rate in Manhattan, New York. Isn't that amazing? For all practical purposes, Iran doesn't have another generation. And they know it. When you put all the numbers together, here's what you've got. World population is continuing to increase, but it's decelerating. And over the next 30 years or so, world population will top out 9 to 10 billion and begin to go down. Those are the actual numbers. There's no dispute among demographers about those numbers, just the public being told something else. There's something happening inside these numbers that gets almost no attention, but in my judgment is crucial to understanding our economic problem now and your business future. It's this. We're living longer and having fewer children. So populations are aging. Now, they're aging at different rates in different places. In Japan, it's catastrophic. 1 out of 5 is over 70, just a few years. Here in the United States, as the baby boomers reach their 60s, what we call the elderly dependency ratio, the percentage of the population that's old, will double in the next 20 years, from 18 or 19% now to 38, 39%. So if you're racing through an airport terminal or wandering through a shopping mall and you think, gee, there are a lot of old geezers around. Yeah, there are. In Europe, when I started flying, when the ticket agent would open the door and say, who needs a little extra time getting down the jetway? Well, 3 or 4 people. Coming in the other night, by the time they finished early boarding, there were about 6 of us left. They're all billion-mile, 1K flyers. In Europe, by 2050, 49% of the entire population will be old. In Greece, 59%. The real kicker is Germany, the economic engine of Europe. By 2040, 61% of Germans will be old. It's not a country, that's a nursing home. According to the United Nations, and remember, these are official numbers, not mine. According to the United Nations, by about 2045, for the first time in history, the number of humans over the age of 55 will be larger than the number of humans under the age of 15. That's never happened before. That's like a pyramid upside down on its point. Now, it doesn't mean in 2045 the pyramid flips. It means every year from now on through the rest of your lives, the rest of your business careers, there will be more and more older people until by about 2045 there are actually more older people than younger people. And why is that so important? Because old people don't spend money the way young people spend money. That's why. When our country was coming out of its last big recession, that was 80-82, the first Reagan administration. Some of you may remember that. That was nasty recession. Unemployment was about 11%. Well, people like me and some of you, we were starting businesses, we were starting families. Boy, did we spend money. Get to be my age, now you just don't spend a lot. You put it aside for retirement, health care, your next root canal. My doctor would like me to have a colonoscopy every 3 weeks. You should see his new boat. He just docked it in the harbor. It's absolutely gorgeous. But you know, you also think differently. When I worked for President Reagan, we lived in Georgetown in Washington, that cute little house. We had dinner parties at the house where the security people sealed off the street because of who was coming. At the time, it seemed important that the wine glasses matched, We had some friends over for dinner the other night, and after they left, Jill and I were cleaning up. We broke one of the wine glasses. As we're cleaning it up, Jill said, "Oh, she'll stop at the thrift store and see what they have." At this point in my career, if all 6 wine glasses don't match, it ain't gonna make a difference. This is why we can't get out of the recession. If you look at the history of every recession ever, at the end of that recession, the economic chart looked like a jet fighter coming off a runway. Straight across and then whoosh. This is the first time in history we're not getting that whoosh at the end of the recession. Reason is we've never been so old. And old people don't spend money the way young people spend money. And remember, they're older than we are in Europe, and the Japanese are older than the Europeans. This, by the way, is the dirty secret of American politics. We've never been so old. That's why we can't get out of this. We went through a presidential campaign that went on for 4 years. They never shut up. No candidate ever mentioned this. No Republican, no Democrat, liberal, conservative, libertarian. No one ever touched it. The 2016 campaigns are underway. No one's going to touch this. The dirty secret of politics is we've never been so old. Old people don't spend money the way young people spend money. There's your glitch. But what do you do? And that gets us to where we came in. As the world emerges from poverty, as we create a global middle class, as the customer base explodes, its demand for your products and services is so huge. If we can connect with them, you're going to pay off the deficit, clear off the debt, and create jobs. That's how all this links together. So let's take a fast look forward and see where we're going. First, I just want to give you a heads up on the war. Here's where we are. We're out of Iraq. We're on our way out of Afghanistan. We're pulling the troops out very quickly. They'll be out before the end of this year. If you go into the hospital for surgery, after surgery, the first thing you say is, "Doc, how soon can I go home?" It's everybody's question. And the answer is always the same: as soon as possible. We don't want to keep you here one extra day. From the moment we went into Afghanistan and Iraq, all anybody wanted to talk about is how quickly can we get the troops out. Well, they're out of Iraq, on our way out of Afghanistan. If you go home from the hospital too soon and you run into trouble, you get back to the hospital. If it turns out we've pulled out of Afghanistan and Iraq too quickly, if they cannot hold it together without us, we're not sending the 82nd Airborne back in. It isn't going to happen. And I'm just telling you, reporting to you, there are a lot of very serious people getting very, very worried that we're pulling out too quickly. This is not the argument over whether we should have gone in. In the real world, there's no rewind button. What's happened has happened. Having done that, should we have stayed longer to get it stable? Remember, when World War II ended in 1945, all we wanted to do is bring home the troops. We still have troops in Japan and Europe. You know why? Because everybody else said, stick around. When you guys are around, everything's stable. When you're not around, we start a world war. It's one of the great achievements of the United States. It cost us $100 trillion, billion, gazillion dollars. But Europe, Japan have been stable, peaceful, prosperous, because we stayed. We didn't bring the troops home. Now we're pulling them out of the most volatile part of the world virtually overnight. Now, maybe it'll work out. If the Iraqis and the Afghans can hold it together without us, well, fine, that's great. If not, watch out. Pakistan is a disintegrating nuclear state. Not President Obama's fault, not President Bush's fault. It's Pakistan's fault. What some of us knew a long time ago, and now everybody knows, is there are units of the Pakistani army and military that are working with al-Qaeda. That's how they hid bin Laden in plain sight for 10 years. Well, who's got control of the nuclear bombs? They've got dozens of them. The answer is we don't know. It's so bad that right now there are units of the U.S. Army called snatch teams. They're right around the Pakistan border. They have one order. If everything goes to hell, just go in and grab the nukes. Yikes. That's scary. Anything wakes everybody up at 3 o'clock one morning, don't be surprised if it's Pakistan. Everybody's nightmare scenario is the disintegrating nuclear state. And then you get to the big one, and the big one is Iran. Not Iraq, Iran. Iran is the classic case of nuts with nukes. It's a bunch of us standing outside our kids' school at 5 to 3. We're chatting, we're waiting to pick up the kids. See a visibly deranged man running toward the schoolyard saying, "I'm holding a hand grenade. I hate kids. I love death." Oh, great. What do you want to do? We can keep chatting. Maybe it's a bad joke. Maybe it's not a hand grenade. It's a mango he picked up at Trader Joe's. Maybe he's a nice guy. He's off his meds. But, if he really is a lunatic and that really is a hand grenade, while we're chatting, he's closing the gap. What you've got in Iran is a bunch of lunatics building a nuclear bomb and talking openly of using it, of trading their cities and populations for ours. In other words, giving up Tehran for Tel Aviv, New York, maybe Charlotte and San Diego. That puts you in the lunatic category. In the Cold War, we used to say the Russians are bastards, but they're not crazy bastards. They didn't want to lose Moscow. We could talk to them. It's unpleasant. We could talk to them. These guys are not on planet Earth. I used to run the U.S. National Intelligence Estimates. These are the senior products of the intelligence service, the ones that go directly to the president, sometimes with an armed guard. So I used to do this for a living. Give you a professional opinion. Iran's got the nuclear bomb. In the real world of intelligence, by the time a spy comes running in and says they have a nuclear bomb at the military base there, the warehouse there, they've had it for a while. We learned this. You can never be too precise on when a country has a nuclear bomb. We invented the nuclear bomb. That was the Manhattan Project in World War II. The total elapsed time from launching the Manhattan Project to Hiroshima was 5 years. That's all. That was the 1940s. You don't have to reinvent the nuclear bomb. You can download the plans. We could buy the parts we need on the open market or the black market. It's not cheap, but we could do it. The hard part is the fuel, turning uranium ore into U-235, plutonium-239. That's the industrial process with the centrifuge spinning that you see on TV. It's very complicated, very expensive. But if you got the scientific talent and the money, you can do it. A dozen countries have done it. South Africa did it. Iran is Persia. They've got the scientific talent, mathematical ability. They've got the money. Every weapons expert I've talked to says the same thing. They're there. Meaning they already have a bomb, or they'll have it in 2 weeks, 6 months, 14 months, 18 months. And anyone who tells you you can be more precise, it's a bunch of baloney. When you hear a defense secretary or someone like that say, "We will know 6 months and 3 days before they have a bomb," no, you won't. There are two great lessons of the 20th century. First great lesson is crazy people sometimes get political power. Hitler was crazy. Brilliant, cunning, he was out of his mind. Idi Amin in Uganda, the maniacs in Cambodia who killed 2 million of their own people. Actually, it's amazing how often crazy people get political power. Second great lesson of the century is when crazy people with political power tell you what they're going to do, believe them. They're not kidding. And of all the people who learned that lesson, it's the Israelis. You can go back to Germany, 1936, 37, even into 1938. There were a lot of German families that could have gotten out, Jewish families that could have gotten out of Germany, and they stayed. They owned businesses, they were senior executives, beautiful homes, lines of credit with their bankers in Frankfurt and Zurich, probably had season tickets to the Berlin Philharmonic. They watched the Nazis come to power. They'd meet with each other and they'd say, look, this is distasteful. This guy's a bunch of lunatics. What are they going to do? Kill us all? As a matter of fact, yes. It's exactly what they did. You should have believed them. Jewish people won't make that same mistake a second time. Once was enough. When the Israeli intelligence service and the military walks into the prime minister's office and says, we're out of time, Israel will launch an attack. Now, whether that's tomorrow, next Wednesday, 6 months from now, 18 months from now, I don't know. But they'll launch an attack. And whether the prime minister is Bibi Netanyahu or a successor, whoever that is, does not wish to go down in history as Israel's last prime minister. I can even tell you what this is going to look like because we've seen it before. Everybody forgets this. A lot of people never knew it. But in Iraq, not Iran, back in Iraq, in the late 70s, early 80s, Saddam Hussein was building a nuclear bomb. This never really came up in the whole Iraq war thing. I don't know why not. They were building the Osirak nuclear reactor right outside Baghdad, and that was to produce the plutonium for Saddam Hussein's nuclear bomb. Osirak was being built by the French and Germans. There was a lot of Iraqi oil money sloshing around Paris and Bonn. Saddam Hussein had bought virtually every politician in France and Germany. They were going to build him a nuclear bomb. They didn't care what he did as long as he didn't drop it on them. And it was frightening. We were just looking at this. Then the Israelis had an election, and the new prime minister was Menachem Begin. And Begin was a tough guy. He took one look at this and he said, nope, this is an existential threat to the existence of the state. That's where the phrase comes from. And he gave the orders to the Israeli Air Force, take out Osirak. It's one of the great stories of the Cold War years. The Israelis were going to use 6 fighter bombers to hit it. It's a long way from Israel to Baghdad and back. When you're flying an Israeli fighter bomber, there's nowhere to land and refuel along the way. Not in that neighborhood. You got to get back to your base. So they welded extra fuel tanks under the wings of the planes. Even with the extra tanks, the calculation was they wouldn't get back all 6 planes and pilots. In other words, if nothing went wrong, you probably wouldn't make it. This was a one-way mission for the existence of the state, and they had 6 pilots who said they would fly it, knowing they're probably not getting back. Well, they had more than 6, but they chose 6 who said they'd fly it. They trained for the mission, and the Israelis are very good at training for missions. One of the things they trained for was flying wingtip to wingtip. It's not a figure of speech. You know, when you take off from a runway here in Charlotte, when you clear the runway, you're still in the United States. Over there, everything's very small. You clear the runway, you're out of Israel. Well, you've got to picture this. They took off from their military base and they're touching wingtips. Within seconds, they were crossing into Jordanian airspace. You've got to go over Jordan to get to Baghdad. What actually happened was when the Jordanian air traffic controller, who was on duty, picked them up on his radar screen as they came into Jordanian airspace. Because of the way they were flying and the technology of 1980, he just saw one big blob coming onto his radar screen. So he came on the air. He said, excuse me, are you a 747? To which the lead bomber pilot replied, yes, we are. And he cleared him through. That's how they did it. This air traffic controller is no longer with us. They took down Osirak. By the way, all 6 pilots made it back. That was a whole other story. One of the 6 pilots, was Ilya Ramon. He's the Israeli astronaut who went down in the space shuttle disaster in 2003. Imagine you survive the Baghdad mission and get down a stupid space shuttle accident. Anyway, the Iranians know what happened. That's why they've dispersed their nuclear facilities all over Iran, 15, 20 sites. They're underground. They're under 15 feet of concrete. They're hardened. The Israeli Air Force isn't big enough. They can hit the nuclear sites. They can set back Iran's nuclear program, but they can't kill it. They haven't got enough planes. They haven't got the bunker busters. They've asked the United States for help, and we've said no. That's why relations between the president and prime minister got so nasty so fast. Buckle your seatbelts. Everyone I've talked to says the same thing. When the Israelis think they're out of time, they're going to launch. So the war isn't over yet. On to the demographics. I hate to say this, but Europe is dying. Now, obviously, you can reverse low birth rates, but not quickly. A legislature can change the tax rate in an afternoon. You can't change the birth rate. The birth rates in Western Europe are so low that to get back to the 2.1 replacement level will now take 2 generations. You need a bigger generation to have a bigger generation. It's 40 to 50 years. Some countries understand the problem. They've come up with solutions, or possible solutions. France, for example. France has the highest birth rate in all of Europe. It's 1.9, same as the US. Still below the replacement level. And that's the highest in the entire continent. The French government has decided that the woman most likely to have a child is already the mother of 2. In other words, a mother of 2 is more likely to have a third than is a single 31-year-old career girl likely to have a first child and change her whole life. So in France, if you are now the mother of 2 and you're willing to have a third, the French government will pay you about $3,500 a month for 18 years. New program, we'll see what happens. England's birth rate's below the replacement level, but they're not solving it. The Journal of the British Medical Association, magazine that goes to every practicing physician, ran an editorial urging doctors to discourage women patients from having children because of the Earth's carbon footprint. My favorite example of how you do not solve this is Russia. Look, Vladimir Putin's driving Russia into the same ditch the communists drove it into. There isn't going to be another Cold War. But they do understand the demographics. The birth rate in Russia is so low. You know, the lifespan of a Russian man is now under 58 years of age. Population's plunging so fast, by 2050, the population of Russia will be about the same size as the population of Yemen, which has a very high birth rate. Yemen's a little place. Russia's nearly 1/6 of the Earth's land surface. As their population plunges below 100 million, no way they can defend the borders out in Siberia. There's no way they can keep the economy going. So what do? A few years ago, the governor of the province of Ulyanovsk issued a proclamation. From now on, September 12th of every year is officially the day of conception. I didn't make this up. Under the terms of the proclamation, on September 12th, all workers are given the afternoon off with orders, it's true, with orders to go home and create a patriot for Russia. The idiot who was president of Russia until last year, Medvedev, he trades back and forth with Putin. Medvedev thought, oh, great idea, this will save the motherland. So they took the idea from Ulyanovsk, and now this is all of Russia on September 12th. Someone must have gotten to Medvedev and Putin and said, you can't call this the day of conception. I mean, you just can't. So they renamed it. Russian PR is not terrific. The official term for September 12th in Russia is the day of marital contact. It's like really not a big improvement. I mean, isn't it a relief to know other countries are led by even bigger idiots sometimes? Well, remember, the winner is the guy who makes the second to last mistake. Demographers tell us 2.1 is the replacement level to sustain your population, but 1.3 is the suicide rate. In other words, there's no example in history of a country whose birth rate dropped to 1.3 that ever turned around and got back up. Today on the European continent, there are 17 countries whose birth rates are at or below 1.3, and so is Japan. Ukraine is about 1.1. That population will drop by 46% over the next few decades. There is a gigantic business opportunity emerging amidst these aging populations in the Western world. Products and services for affluent aging people without enough young people to help. Honda and Toyota have new divisions devoted to this. They're developing what they call service robots. One of their new service robots automatically bathes a person. When mom or dad can no longer bathe himself or herself, that's when the kids are on the phone at 11 o'clock at night. What do we do now? Well, they're developing machinery for that. In Germany, BMW, the automobile company, opened the first factory they've ever designed explicitly for an older workforce. Better lighting, non-skid floors, a whole new set of hand tools, because older people just don't have the physical strength of younger people. Soon as you say that in the advanced world, the population's aging, there are gigantic business opportunities. Don't you see all those ads on TV for, bathtubs with doors on them for people who can't get over it, and different mattresses? And even the simple thing like those very fancy corkscrews, looks like the nuclear-powered corkscrews to get a cork out. This is simple. Before I left home to come here, for the first time ever, I opened a bottle of wine for my wife. I left it in the fridge. What I've discovered is she couldn't work the corkscrew anymore. It was just too hard. It was just too tight. And I just, how come you never drink any wine when I'm not there? And it turned out she just couldn't get it open. So I opened it for her and I left it. Well, that's why you're seeing all these ads and things. We're getting older. There is a gigantic business opportunity emerging. Products and services for affluent aging populations without enough young people. But the real big opportunity, that's not enough, are these emerging markets. The world is becoming modern, it's becoming middle class. The customer base is growing at 50 to 100 million customers a year. So we want to bring the world out of poverty, not just for their sake, but for our own. We want these customers. If we go about this clumsily, it'll be a mess. The water will be polluted, you can't drink it, the air is going to be filthy, you're choking on it. But the one thing you never want to say to these people is, sorry, too late. I've got a big house, 2 SUVs, you can't. The trick is to bring the world out of poverty and to do it in a way that doesn't wreck the planet. Isn't that an interesting problem? And the solution that's emerging is this. We do it by creating products and services that are clever, inexpensive, and green. And that's why you keep hearing these words. This is no longer an environmental issue. This is now the core driving issue of global business. To bring the world out of poverty and to do it in a way that doesn't wreck the planet. Isn't that fascinating? Now, you all know IKEA, the Swedish furniture store. I'll bet you've never seen the IKEA house, because they don't sell it in North America. 900 square feet. Looks exactly the way you think an IKEA house would look. You can't quite put it on top of your car and drive it home, but close. And you assemble it on a slab, probably with the same stupid black wrench you use for everything else. It's clever, inexpensive, stylish. Materials don't rot in a hot climate. That's brilliant. There's a company in China manufacturing a very small house. They wouldn't let you build it in Charlotte. It's even got the wiring and plumbing in it. You screw it together, plug it in. Clever, inexpensive, green. In India, the Tata Group launched the Nano. The Tata Group announced it will invent a new kind of housing module for the world's emerging middle class. Each module will sell for the equivalent of $8,600. I don't want one. I'm sure you don't. Don't bet against the Tata guys. They're very smart. Remember, they launched the Nano, the $2,500 car for the emerging middle class. The Nano doesn't seem to have been a commercial hit, but it opened up a whole new category of vehicles for an emerging middle class. Datsun just announced a $3,000 car. Honda just announced a $500 motorcycle. See? Clever, inexpensive, green. Another example of that is ebooks. If you want to buy one of my books, fine. Buy the book. I own the publishing company. So I'll cut down a tree to make the book for you. Then I'll burn fuel shipping it to you or Amazon or Barnes & Noble. Or you can download the ebook version. Same content, no environmental damage, fraction of the cost. Clever, inexpensive, green. The Japanese Trade Ministry issued a directive to all Japanese companies. They said develop products and services for a customer base that has between $9 and $24 a day disposable income. You know, you or I can go to Costco or Walmart, get this gigantic box of laundry soap. It's very cheap given the size of the box, but you need 20 bucks. If you have $12 a day disposable income, that's hard. Well, Procter & Gamble and other companies like that are developing all new packaging products. You don't see these in our part of the world. It's very inexpensive and it's small. And their customers can go back every few days and get a little more of the laundry soap, of whatever it is, of the cereal. And it's inexpensive because of the way they're packaging it, but if you only have a few dollars a day disposable income, that's the way you do it. So what you're seeing now is companies reinventing themselves, looking at a new customer base that's never been there before, wants everything we've got, but we have to reformulate it in a way that they can purchase. That's what you're seeing happen. If we're going to bring the world out of poverty, we're going to need an unbelievable amount of energy, fuel. People are going to live decently. That means we've got to light up those houses and apartments. You've got to cool them. You've got to heat them. They're going to have appliances in those houses. Do you realize how many jobs are going to have to be created in the world for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 billion people to come out of poverty? That means factories. That means trucks on the road. That means office buildings. The amount of fuel we are going to need is unlike anything anyone has imagined. Now, whether that means drilling for oil, natural gas, biofuels, wind, solar, nuclear, all of the above, my guess is everything plus a couple of things we haven't come up with yet. Conservation's great, but if you're going to bring entire continents out of poverty, the amount of fuel, of energy you're going to need is unlike anything we've ever imagined. We're also going to need food, in particular protein. In the last 8 years, meat consumption in China more than doubled. It's a lot of cows and pigs. They eat corn. Corn prices go up and up and up, and food prices go up and up and up. By the way, it turns out that as people come out of poverty, they eat bread. Human beings eat bread. If the price of bread goes up in Charlotte, it will make no difference in how much bread you eat. But the world price of wheat keeps going up as more people come out of poverty, eat more bread. 2 years ago in January, for the first time, the world price of wheat kicked over the line to where the poor people in Cairo could not afford their daily loaf of bread. That was the trigger that set off the revolutions. And by the way, to produce food, you need fuel. To grow the food, harvest it, process it, transport it, distribute it, refrigerate it. It's going to need an unbelievable amount of food and fuel, and there are revolutions underway in both industries. For example, fracking in the energy industry. In the food industry, companies like Nestle are developing new products, kind of protein bars. Not the protein bars you buy at a 7-Eleven, but protein bars out of Star Trek. In other words, all new food products to feed a whole emerging global population. It's really exciting stuff. You hear more and more about genetically engineered seeds. You know, if we're going to bring 5, 6, 7, 8 billion people out of poverty, there isn't enough acreage out there to grow the food. You have to increase yield per acre, and that's why you hear more about these genetically engineered seeds. This is getting interesting politically. The environmental people are against all this. They don't want to bring more energy out of the ground. They don't like the genetically engineered seeds. And their argument is they want to protect the earth. No. They're actually condemning 8 billion people to perpetual poverty. And that's not a side of the argument they want to be on. So that's changing fast. As the world becomes middle class, you're seeing the growth of infrastructure in a way we've never seen before. Power stations, water treatment plants, factories, roads, houses, whole new cities, shopping centers, office complexes, malls. Never has there been so much construction in the world as we create these middle-class societies. As people emerge from poverty, they buy health care. A friend of mine is a medical device inventor, apparently a successful one. He's working with a team now. They think they can invent a heart pacemaker that's much less expensive than the one you or I would get if we're taken to the local hospital. Well, if he can come up with an inexpensive pacemaker, there's some global market for that. So people buy health care. As they emerge from poverty, they buy education. Because we're human beings, we buy entertainment. So the growth industries of the 21st century are energy, food, infrastructure, health care, education, and entertainment. And if you look at those industries through the prism of clever and expensive and green, that's how your company's customer base grows by 50 to 100 million customers every year. The countries that have led the way, of course, are China and India. And things are changing fast. China has actually hit the wall. They've accomplished a lot. Look how many people they brought out of poverty in the last 30 years. It is no longer accurate to say China is a communist country. It's a chamber of commerce with guns. Not quite the same thing. And the Chinese economic model is very simple. We make it happen, we give you cheap labor. Now maybe you've done this, if not you know people who have. We had dinner with these guys in Shanghai 3 years ago, we signed the contract. 6 months later the factory was open. This country, it takes 5 years to file the environmental impact statement. It's true. Do you know how they got the factory open in 6 months? They shot everyone who objected to it. Ran tanks right over them. Turns out people don't like being shot. Who knew? China's middle class. You can't do that to middle class people. You just can't. Today, the level of political protest in China is greater than it was in the Soviet Union before the Cold War ended. There are protests all the time against this factory, this power station. The city of Wuhan was in open revolt against Beijing last year because of some factory that they wanted to build and people didn't want. To its great credit, the Chinese government isn't sending tanks in. You just can't send tanks in to kill middle-class people. Good. They sent in a facilitator to calm things down, talk to them. The upshot is they can't make things happen anymore. Now, the other part of that deal is we give you cheap labor. Well, as you know, China's had a one-child per family policy. Birth rate's 1.1. Did you know China's the most rapidly aging country on Earth? At least Japan had the good sense to get rich before it got old. China's trying to do it the other way around. You can't. Last year, for the first time ever, the Chinese workforce shrank. And it's shrinking now at an accelerating rate. What happens when a workforce shrinks? The answer is wages go up. Chinese wages are going through the roof. So they can't make it happen anymore. That's why American companies are suddenly not expanding factories in China, or they're opening factories in other countries like Vietnam, Bangladesh, even Burma, instead of China, because the whole Chinese model just collapsed. I live on the West Coast now. From San Diego all the way north to Vancouver, real estate agents are reporting that affluent Chinese people, people like us, are buying homes. And what they're telling the real estate people is, we think China could blow apart in 5 to 6 years and need a place to run. I think that's overly dramatic, but when people like us say things like that to the real estate agents, that's not nothing. China's in big trouble. Have you noticed how many Chinese students are in the United States? Not just at the university level, the high school level, middle school level. You know why? First, it's a good education, but the other reason is the way the law is written. If your child is enrolled in school here, and these kids are here legally with the right visas and all that, if the kid's here, we will allow the parents to come in. So what these Chinese people are doing is they're pre-positioning their kid in the United States in case they need to make a run for it. That's what that's all about. Isn't that interesting? Keep your eye on India. India's coming up fast on the outside. Birth rate's 2.8. It's a democracy. They speak English. They got the rule of law. India's made a crucial decision. For 50 years, all they wanted was to lead the third world. Drove everyone crazy. India says now, we've outgrown that. Want to sit at the head table. Good, India belongs at the head table. I think India's going to blow past China. You know, the Indian middle class is now over 300 million people. Now, they've got problems, a terrible power grid, roads are bad, a lot of corruption, democracies are slow to get going. I think in the long run, India pulls ahead of China. Now, in the last hour or so, we've made 45 orbits around the planet, and I wanted to cover a lot of territory fast. You've been very patient. Here's what it means when you put it all together. You know, right now it's fashionable, particularly among intellectuals, to be a pessimist. Everybody sees everything going wrong. I'm convinced that on the day our scientists announce the cure for cancer, every talking head on Fox News will tell you why this is a disaster. We're going to live longer, that's going to bankrupt Social Security. It's fashionable to be a pessimist. And look, things are going wrong, obviously. And I don't mean this politically, whether we're Democrats or Republicans. Can we agree that in Washington, D.C., the genius to square foot ratio isn't that high? You know, this is not Florence in 1500 or, Philadelphia in 1789. If you look ahead, not out the window, but down at the radar screen, so you can see the world that lies in front of you, here's what we're heading for. Within our lifetimes, within the lifetimes of most of you here, the world will cross a line that's never been crossed before, and that most economists never even imagined could be crossed. For the first time in history, the overwhelming majority of human beings will not be poor. Isn't that stunning? Our children will live in a world in which most people are not poor. As the world emerges from poverty, you will see the creation of a global middle class. This global middle class will become the most powerful force in the world. Powerful socially, powerful politically, and above all, powerful economically. Its demand for products and services is so huge that first it will require companies like yours to rethink and reinvent yourselves almost every month because of the way this is changing and what's happening. But it will also set off what more and more economists believe will not only be an economic boom, but a sonic boom. Do you realize that right now 7 of the world's 10 fastest growing economies are in sub-Saharan Africa? And you were saying you've been doing that. Do you remember Rwanda, the catastrophe in Rwanda? I can never remember if the Tutus killed the Hutsis or the Hutsis killed the Tutus, but 800,000 people died. Remember that disaster in Rwanda? Do you know Marriott's building a hotel in Rwanda? It's growing at 8% a year. People like you are going there doing business. Isn't that stunning? There are more and more economists who believe we're heading for a sonic boom, and there are even more and more of us, including me, who think we may be on the verge of a supersonic boom. Now look, we're all grown-ups, we've all been around the block a few times. Everything takes longer than you want, everything costs more. God knows we make mistakes. We make mistakes at the personal level, at the corporate level, the national level. Fine, we do. But do you realize of the 6 industries that will dominate the 21st century, energy, food, infrastructure, healthcare, education, entertainment, what country holds the leadership in all 6 industries? It's the United States. Do we have problems? Yes. Will we make mistakes? I'm sure we will. We're not geniuses. But boy, if you can think about the world in a different way, if you can look at the products and services you've got now and say, how do we recast those for a world that's never been there before? For a customer base that wants everything we've got. Wow. I cannot imagine a more interesting, more optimistic, more exciting time to be alive, to be in the United States, and to be in a business like yours. And thank you for listening to me. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Do you want to do some questions? Anyone has a question? Sir?
Why didn't you mention Korea in your world?
I didn't mention Korea for 2 reasons. One, I forgot. And the other is I was trying to cover too much. It's another case of nuts with nukes. I don't think that kid's running North Korea. He looks like he couldn't run a local Starbucks, okay? So there must be some military group or something in behind him. Here's the deal. North Korea wants South Korea, period. The only thing stopping them is the United States. The South Koreans won't fight. They just won't fight. Even if they fight the North and hold them off, Seoul will be a pile of rubble. Seoul is 35 miles from the border with North Korea. So what's the point of fighting in places that pile of rubble? So the only thing stopping is the United States, and they want us out of there. We've been asking China to give us a hand. China provides 90% of North Korea's fuel. We'd like them to just turn off that spigot slowly, and they won't do it. Now, I'm not there, but I've been in the middle of conversations like this. What the Chinese are probably saying to our Secretary of State, what they said to the last dozen Secretaries of State is, yeah, okay, we can take down North Korea for you. We'd like Taiwan. Trade you. And you may have a president who says, fine, take down North Korea, you can have Taiwan. And that's where you are. By the way, you do realize that under treaty obligations, if China goes after Taiwan, we are obliged to go to war for Taiwan. By a show of hands, how many of you think we'll go to war Tuesday for Taiwan? Fine, well, what if the Chinese figure that out? And that's where you're hypocrite. So that's the deal with Korea. It's a little dicey. Anybody else? Yes, there are poor people in the United States. You, my son, yes, but again, it's a definition of poor. I mean, look, there are people who are having a hard time. Our hearts go out to them. It is serious. I don't mean to make light of this. But no, not in the sense of there's no one hungry in the United States. There is no one hungry in Charlotte. There isn't a church group here that will feed them. So no one's hungry in that sense. Tell you something else since you asked. I play the piano. It's my hobby. If you're very lucky, you'll never hear me make a mess of the Moonlight Sonata. But I like to play the piano. And I've got a 98-year-old grand piano. I'm its primary caregiver. Anyway, my piano tuner came over, and he's a wonderful guy. I've known him for years. And he's basically a communist. He thinks Lenin just didn't go far enough, which is odd because I've never met a harder working man in my life. He tunes pianos. If you're having a dinner party for 10 people, he'll cater it. You want your house landscaped, he'll do it. He's the captain of a boat. You want to charter a cruise ship, he'll do it. This is the oddest thing. He's a great guy, by the way. Fantastic tuner. Anyway, he was over the house a while ago, tuning the piano. We were chatting. And he said that on the way to my house, he passed through town, and he saw that in the local coffee shop, all these guys are sitting there at 2 o'clock in the afternoon having coffee, moaning and groaning. There's not enough work out there. There's not enough construction business and all that. And he looked up at me. You've got to picture this guy. He's just sort of sweating with my piano, that big instrument piano tuners use to move the strings. And he looked up at me. He said, "How come no one's knocking on my door asking for work?" Now that's interesting. If somebody knocked on my door and said, "Excuse me, sir, I need some work," I would find something. There's not a chance in the world I'd slam that door. Would you? I give you $100 to help me clear the garage out. Been meaning to do it for 3 years. And while he was getting set to do that, my wife would make him a sandwich. And by the way, I'd call a couple of my friends where I live and say, "Hey, come on, what have you got? Don't tell me I don't have anything. Let's give this guy a hand." Wouldn't you? How come no one's knocking on my door? There's your glitch. Boy, did he put his finger on something. I assume that if I stop working, some point the lights go out. No, I mean the credit card doesn't go. Jill pulls into the gas station, swipes the card, nothing happens. TV goes out. All these people sitting in the coffee shop, they got cell phones, they got gas in the car, they got 100 channels coming in on the cable system. What's going on? And this is your glitch. Now again, there are people in this country suffering. I don't mean to make light of it, but we've actually created a system where it is possible to not work and have a pretty good standard of living. I've actually been looking into this because I'm curious. I was telling some young journalist friends of mine, quit your job and without breaking the law, figure out what standard of living you can achieve with unemployment insurance, food stamps, and on and on. By the way, it looks like it's close to $40,000 a year. Okay? So yes, we do have a problem. Again, there are people out there suffering, and I don't mean to make light of it. But you've actually built a system where it is possible to not work and live okay. And that's a glitch. Sir? It very could, yes. And by the way, I've had physicians say that not you, but your kid's generation will be the first generation whose lifespan may be shorter than their parents. Look, if we keep screwing things up, yeah, there won't be the jobs, there won't be this. We're getting old, and we're getting old fast, which means people like you are going to be taking care of people like me. And my generation, we baby boomers, we will not go gently into the good night. The last thing we do before we drop dead is going to be to bankrupt the country. Well, I go out for my bike ride every day. In the last year, the hill has begun to steepen. Not happy. If you notice, they're using smaller print in newspapers, and people mumble. They used to speak clearly. If I can't get up the damn hill another year, I want new knees. I'm voting for any politician who puts new knees on the plan. You know who's going to pay for it? You. And all the rest of you younger people. There's your glitch. And by the way, that's why we need to get to this new customer base. What all these political leaders, and I don't mean this is a Democrat-Republican thing, they're ignoring this. There are so many customers out there for everything we've got. If we can connect your products and services with them, you're going to pay off the deficit, clear the debt. You're going to create more jobs here than we've got young people. That's why this is such a crucial linkage. If we don't do it, then yes, it's going to be a real problem. Sir?
You mentioned birth rates, Japan,
Hmm?
Western Europe, low birth rates. The difference apparently in China is that they're investing a lot of money into the newborn fleet, big military investment.
It could. I don't lose that much sleep about China. Can I have a minute here? Can I just? Okay, here's the deal with China. Good question. Here's why. You all know, China's had this one child per family and all that. What you also need to understand is demographically, they're committing suicide. Here's the deal. Before I give you the demographics, I'll give you a short lesson in biology. When we have children, you get 103 boys for every 100 girls. That's the human ratio. It's not American versus Oriental or Republican versus Democrat. You just get 103 boys for every 100 girls. Today we have the technology to know which is which. Virtually everywhere in the world, expectant parents know the sex of an unborn child. In China, there's a cultural preference for boys, so they abort the girls. So many that in China, instead of having the normal human ratio of 103 boys to every 100 girls, it's 118 boys to every 100 girls. In some provinces, it's over 130 boys to every 100 girls. And there's a province of China that just reported a ratio of 192 boys to every 100 girls. What this means in real numbers is that there are nearly 100 million boys growing up in China who will never find wives. It's unprecedented. Usually when you have a gender imbalance, you've lost the men in a war, they've lost the women. Let me tell you, the single most destabilizing force in the world is a bunch of unmarried men. There's no example of unmarried women knocking over a 7-Eleven or setting off a car bomb. China says by 2050 the gender gap will be about 200 million. Now, right now in China, they have 165 million old people. They have no pensions, no health insurance of any kind, and no daughters. Who takes care of old people? It's not the sons and the sons-in-law, is it? It's the daughters and the daughters-in-law, right? Well, they aborted their daughters, which means their sons can't find wives. There's a new industry in China. What these companies do is they fly bachelors to other countries for wives. They load up the planes in Shanghai and Beijing on Friday night. Bachelors fly them over to Saigon, Ho Chi Minh City, and they've arranged receptions with the Vietnamese girls. And they cut the deals. I don't mean they cut the deals Friday night, but these companies arrange the transportation, introductions, courtships, marriages, immigration. Chinese men are sweeping across Asia, bringing back gigantic numbers of wives from other countries. They've done Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia. They just started flying into Burma, and the men in those countries don't like it. These are their daughters. These are their sisters. China says by 2025 there will be 250 million old people. It's a catastrophe. To show you how screwed up they are. And again, we always see the mistakes we make, but not the other countries. They just passed a law in China. If you are the only child, which is virtually everyone, by law, you must be in touch with your parents once every 90 days, either by telephone or in person. China being China, there are new companies now to outsource that. So if you really can't stand having dinner with your old man once every 90 days, you hire someone to do it. And there's a huge public debate in China, is this okay? Or have we made a mess of it? The upshot is, yes, they're building a navy, yes, they're doing this. If you're my age, you can remember in the late 70s, early 80s, I don't think a month went by without a conference at some swishy hotel in New York or San Francisco or London on how Japan was taking over the world. Remember those? Been to any lately? China's not taking over the world. It's becoming the world's biggest nursing home. Yes, they're building a fleet. Yes, they're doing this. But no, I don't think they'll be the world's next superpower. The kinds of things you're doing in your business are so much more innovative than anything they can do. Not that they're not smart enough. They haven't got the system. They haven't got the freedom. You don't have a whole lot of Steve Jobs wandering around Beijing. some kid drops out of school, wanders around, they throw him in a free education camp. They don't leave him alone thinking, hey, maybe he'll start an Apple. They don't do that. So I'm not that concerned about China. Yeah, it's going to be a nuisance. Yes, they'll have a big fleet. Wouldn't worry about it. Sir?
Several times in your presentation you talked about everybody using the same number.
On the demographics, yeah.
Is Klein new?
Yeah, the baseline number is age 55, and then it moves up very quickly. So, for example, 6 years from now, 1 out of every 5 Japanese will be over 70. If you want to know how many over 60, it's probably closer to 1 out of 4. In Europe, 49–50% of the population will be old, which technically means over 55, but again, that starts moving up to 60, 65, 70 very quickly. So the baseline is 55, and it just keeps moving from there. It's a pure mathematical ratio thing, but that's where it starts. But once you hit that 55, then it's moving up very, very quickly because there aren't enough young people. We used to have 16 Americans for every American on Social Security. Do you know how many there are now? You know what the number is? 3. Yeah. So that's how that throws the math off very quickly. By the way, the demographers can give you the year and probably the month when it becomes 2, at which point we're Greece, if we don't fix this. That's where we have to get to this new customer base. Sir?
Herbert, may have something that's different about yesterday that you didn't mention. I'm sure you know, and 2 weeks ago there was an article in Congress about the birth rate in Africa.
This is actually interesting. I think your decision to focus on Africa, among other places, is fantastic. Remember, 7 of the world's 10 fastest growing economies are in Africa. Do you know the fastest growing religion in Africa, by the way? It's Christianity. Christianity, yeah. My wife is Catholic. The Catholic Church in this country imports priests from Africa, which is amazing. And by the way, they're good. They're not a bunch of squishy liberal types. I mean, these guys are, they're not kidding. Jill says it's fantastic. She thinks they're great. The answer is, what happens is this. As you come out of poverty, as you become middle class, birth rates go down. Women become educated. They have jobs, they have careers. So it's less common to see a family of 5, 6, 7, things like that. And that's what starts to happen as you become more prosperous. Now, what's happened in Europe is it's gone completely off a cliff. In other words, everyone assumed the birth rates would come down as people became educated, women went to universities, started careers and things. No one saw it completely dropping dead. What you'll see in Africa is birth rates beginning to come down, and they are in some countries now, but probably not going off a cliff, maybe never, but certainly not for a very long time. Well, there was that terrorist attack at the mall in Nairobi a couple of months ago. Remember that? It was horrible, but most people didn't know there was a mall in Nairobi. With the same shops you've got at your fancy malls here, and I've got where I live. Again, as people come out of poverty, as they become middle class, suddenly you have a washer, you have a dryer, every kid wants his own room, and on and on and on. And birth rates begin to come down. So I think that's probably what will happen. And that's a good thing. Remember, these are our customers, which is fantastic. Sir?
What's Putin's end game in Ukraine?
I think he's probably got his end game in the Ukraine as he wanted Crimea, and he got it. I grew up in Brooklyn. Life's simple. When a bully shows up, punch him in the teeth. That's the first thing you do, is punch his teeth out. That gets his attention. No one's stopping him. I don't mean to make this political, but since you're asking. I take it most of us here are parents. Yeah? It's not a bad idea if the kids are just a little afraid of you. I don't mean that in an abusive sense, but if the kid thinks, gee, the last time I did that, it didn't end well, so I'm not doing that again. There are certain things that just don't happen. Now, you can't prove something didn't happen, but come on, we're grown-ups, didn't happen, all right? It's not bad if the world is afraid of the American president. There are things that don't happen. When Reagan was in the White House, there were things that didn't happen because he was Reagan. And my great concern is no one's afraid of the president. Whether they're right or wrong is another question. Again, I don't mean to make this political. But Putin's not afraid. What he just showed is, why should I be afraid of you? And I was saying before, if China hits Taiwan, we're not going to go fight. By the way, Latvia, the Baltic states, they're members of NATO now. Ukraine is not. Latvia is a member of NATO. I think Latvia is half the size of North Carolina. If Putin sends 3,000 troops into Latvia, do you think we're going to send NATO in to go to war? Well, what if Putin figures that out? So you've got this odd situation for the first time in a very long while. No one's afraid of the American president. That's worrisome. That's a scary thing. We'll see what happens. So I think his end game in Ukraine is, I just showed no one has to be afraid of this guy. Now, by the way, that could turn out to be wrong. He could hit somewhere else and we'll hit him with everything we've got. He can miscalculate. But that's why that's a little worrisome. Yeah. That we'll see.
So do we have maybe one more question there? How about all the new regs and everything?
The rules and regulations? It's a disaster. You know, and again, I don't mean to be political, but we have an administration. Never in history have we had an administration with so many senior officials with zero business experience. I mean, all of them combined never seem to have run an orange juice stand, you know, at a high school football game. And they don't get it. And that's very worrisome. Now, again, we've had liberal democratic regimes, but these guys ran businesses. They came up through businesses. They had that background. And now you've got a lot of theoretical people, sort of the faculty club. So to a great extent, they really don't have that experience, and that's worrisome. It's a bit like putting people in the cockpit of a 747 who just don't have enough flying experience. Not a good idea. You know, Washington, D.C. isn't just a city. It's a profession. You go to Washington, you deal yourself in. You become the third assistant secretary of defense in charge of bullets. And the next thing you know, you're some senior fellow at some think tank. And then you're back at the State Department as the deputy head of policy planning. And now your kids are in the terrific schools, Georgetown Friends, and you're living in Georgetown on it. When Jill and I left Washington, everyone thought we were crazy. Why would you leave? You just put all this time and energy into becoming somebody. Why would you leave? It's a profession. It's not Republican Democratic. I'll give you an example. If you take a couple, say 40 years old, okay? They moved to Washington when they were younger, got married, started a family. He's a senior official at one of the congressional committees, say deputy staffer at the committee. She's an environmental lawyer, something like that. They got an income of probably about $300,000. Match that in Charlotte. By the way, they have absolutely no skills you would want in Charlotte. Okay? That's a lot of money. Okay, they're living pretty well. And the kids are in Georgetown Day School, and from there it's straight to Yale, Harvard Law, and on to the Supreme Court. You know, they're not giving that up. And you know, I'm with you on this. I don't think you're going to solve this until every fourth house in the suburbs in Washington has a for sale sign. You know, these last few years have been tough in the United States. People have had to sell houses and cut back and things like that. Not in Washington. It just keeps going up and up. And there's your glitch. You're right, there's a political class. It's not Republican or Democrat. But that's what they do. Washington is a profession. And there's your glitch. So, tactical nuclear strike would suit me. I'm all for it. Anyway, thank you.